The digestive system. I think it's worth covering the digestive system at this point so that we know what our food diary is actually for. So starting off, to some degree we begin it with our eyes. So we're looking at our food, we're seeing our food, and it's lovely when you go to a restaurant, this amazing platter of yummy things comes out. So to some degree, we're beginning our digestive process from looking at it, and then our mouth begins to salivate and we begin to already imagine the taste. And in some ways, our body is creating that saliva to prepare the body for what's to come. So when we put the food inside of our mouth, now that the saliva investigates, it's looking at where all of these little molecules need to go in the body. It's checking out the pH, the frequency, the vibration of the food that's going in there. So it's really important at this stage that we're chewing our food well. So this is giving information to all of the cells in our body. The saliva ought to be alkaline. If it is acidic, then we have some other issues, but we certainly will have some oral health issues. And oral health is super important for our body. If, for example, you have a mercury filling and you notice that the gum is all quite blue around it, that is a form of mercury poisoning, and that mercury will be going down into the tummy. So that's very tough on the body. So the condition of the mouth is really important. If there's any infections in the gums, in the jaw, it is definitely worth having that looked at, or bring it to a meeting, we can discuss it, because there's some lovely mouthwashes that you can take to clean the mouth out. So the oral health is incredibly important, and if you've ever had a heart issue or on a heart operation, your cardiologist generally sends you to the dentist to see that your teeth are okay. So there is some professions medically that recognize it. In alternative, most definitely. Every single one of your teeth, first of all, is light that travels through it. It has a nerve that comes up to a segment of the brain which goes down to the part of the body. So it can be that a person has very bad teeth and then they have very sick body. You fix up the teeth, you have a much better chance of fixing up the body. Okay. The stomach. The stomach ought to be very acidic, so that it can chop all the foods down to much finer, smaller protein chains, so that we can absorb them much better in our gut. Now, it is very common that people have low stomach acid. This is the most common. The symptoms of low stomach acid and high stomach acid are almost identical. It would basically feel like acid reflux coming up. Then people tend to lean into antacids, which are basically aluminium and bismuth, and block up the pores in the tummy, and this is a disaster waiting to happen. A nicer remedy is aloe vera. Aloe vera works within a minute or two and doesn't cause any negative effects at all. But the issue can be, and it's worth getting this checked yourself, but more often than not, it's low stomach acid. And the remedy for that is to take stomach acid, which is called HCl, or hydrochloric acid. And that's available over the counter, and it is a fantastic remedy if you're having digestive issues, because if those foods are not being broke down properly, there's no way it can be absorbed anyway. If you really are in a very low lull with your energy, it would be more advisable to have liquid sort of foods, like your baby bowls, or maybe even curries or light curries, things like that, but certainly no heavy meats, or gluten and dairy are actually the hardest of all to break down. You need really, stomach acid, that like lava to go through gluten. So these kind of foods can be very hard for our body to break down. And then acidic foods like tomatoes, dare I say, potatoes are actually, and so is ice cream. These are very acidic sort of natured foods, which might feel lovely going down, but can cause havoc in the body. But for now, I'll just say that the tummy needs to have high hydrochloric acid to break down the foods, and it ought to have good release of enzymes from the pancreas. When we get into the small intestine, it ought to be alkaline. So the beginning of the small intestine has the most work. The intestine is layered with, it said something like 13 tennis court fields. That's how big if you pull the entire small intestine out. It's 6 meters long, but it's completely covered with a layer called villi, and these actually look something like seaweed almost moving, and they have little suction cups on the top. So they'll then take in, once the stomach's broken down the foods into much smaller chains, they'll absorb these little chains in. The molecules go in through the villi, through some chemical changes, and then out into the bloodstream. So if that's all working, that's great. You will feel much better. When that's not working, as per almost everyone on this call probably, what happens is the foods that are undigested are much bigger molecules. They can't be absorbed through the villi, so they scrape it and scratch it till they eventually create holes in the gut. And this is known as leaky gut syndrome, and this is a big part of autoimmune and chronic fatigue. It's where the food is busting through the cell wall, it is causing havoc. Then the body sends out an enzyme to catch onto it so it can read it and figure out where in the body it goes. But then that sets off an alarm system like, there's something wrong here. Then another enzyme comes in to kill the two of them, and that is autoimmune. So we will be looking at getting people out of autoimmune via the gut. So once you've putting in the right fuel, it takes an enormous pressure off the system, particularly at this junction going from the from the stomach into the small intestine. This is basically where the war starts to really break out. If this is occurring, there is inflammation all over the body. It might show in some places, it may not be showing, but there is inflammation for sure. Okay, so in the small intestine, this is where we're absorbing most of our nutrients. Most of the goodness of the food is being absorbed in this area. Our gut ought to be full of healthy bacteria also. Unfortunately, that's not always the case due to high chemicalization of our foods. A lot of the bacteria are taken out. So a probiotic can be absolutely fantastic on the gut. And I also mentioned aloe vera earlier. Aloe vera is magic for taking down inflammation in the gut, to give your body more of a chance to do the things it should do. If your body is repairing all of the time, then it is going to be tired all of the time, because it's not built to be always in a state of repair. This should be just a by the way kind of activity, not a full-time duty. So it's super important to look at our foods. Okay, in the third section of the small intestine, I mentioned that the B12 is absorbed here and many of the other B vitamins. If this is not working properly, it can be sometimes known as Crohn's disease. However, I would certainly encourage anyone who has Crohn's disease to have a look at parasites. It's a very real situation that can happen there. And then we're moving into the large intestine, which ought to be acidic. This ought to be able to absorb all the water back in, up to absorb iron and some other nutrients, and then release the feces and all the other cells and tissues that our body no longer needs. And then that is passed through the bowel. Mentioned a few times now, parasites are the most common problem to have here. Also fungal overloading, and if it is a constipated bowel, there's lots of pockets where food can hang out there for long term, and this creates bacteria and holes and really sort of bigger problems in the bowel. So we'll be looking at ways to help the bowel, and sometimes fasting can be the most beneficial way. Sometimes it's moving to a more juice diet for a few days, or maybe even 1 or 2 days a week, simply juicing and nothing else, which means that you can have as much as you like, but it must all be liquidized down. So to give your body a break. And then we will also look at alkalizing, how to alkalize the body. So why do I say alkalize and not make our body more acidic? So every tissue in the body ought to have a perfect pH level for itself. So your kidney and your liver will be different. Your the skin on the outside of your body and the connective tissue on the inside of the body will all have different pH levels. We can negotiate these levels via the stomach. If we can correct the stomach acids, we can correct the acid levels of the entire body, regardless of some are alkaline and some are acidic. Generally speaking, people are far too acidic. It's very unusual to get someone who's too alkaline. They may be vegan and working on it for 30 years. Other than that, our food sources make our tummy very acidic, or make our bodies very acidic. So we can correct that with hydrochloric acid alone, or we can use digestive enzymes. We can have a more alkaline diet, which really works for our tissues very well. The majority of green veg are going to be alkalizing, and then you get some of the more red kind of colors are more acidic, which are not ideal at all. So some people, if you're planting your own tomatoes at home, this may not be the best food source to be eating every day. So if you are sowing, that you do plant many different types of veggies so that you can get a full range.